I know we're at the beginning, but let's talk about endings. You know what makes a good ending? A cliffhanger. Cliffhangers are great. There are all kinds of cliffhangers, but two significant ones for role-playing games are the unresolved peril and the escalating bang. Unresolved peril is pretty self-explanatory. The PCs, or people, or things they care about, are in a state of jeopardy, and we leave them hanging, uncertain of the outcome. The anticipation of the cliffhanger is based on desperately wanting to know the fate of the things we care about. An escalating bang, on the other hand, is the point in the scene where the stakes are either precipitously raised to a whole new level, or when the stakes you thought the scene were about abruptly change into something completely different. If you cut more or less on the exact moment that the escalating bang is revealed, the anticipation of the cliffhanger is based on being uncertain about where the scene is going, and also the eagerness to take action in the new reality presented by the bang. Sometimes you can combine these. For example, if the PCs are exploring an old house and a ghost suddenly appears, it not only changes the nature of the scene, the supernatural is now involved, it also puts the PCs in jeopardy. Anticipation is the key. What makes the cliffhanger desirable as a dramatic technique is that the players immediately want to keep playing. They want to take action. They want to see what happens next, but you're denying that to them. They're going to have to wait. It's a great way of ending a session because it makes the players eager for the next session. Your use of a good cliffhanger also doesn't have to be limited to the end of a session, though. Just like a television show cutting to a commercial break, I guess if you're old enough to remember what a commercial break was, you can frame a cliffhanger before taking a 5 or 10 minute break in the middle of a session. If the PCs have split up, you can create numerous cliffhangers by cutting from one group to the other in the middle of the action. You'll keep everyone at the table on the edge of their seats, anxious to see what happens next, not just to their characters, but to everyone's characters. Now, cliffhangers, of course, are not the only way to end a session. Another option is to ask a question. This can be quite literal, with either you as the game master asking a question of the players, or an NPC asking it in character of one or more of the PCs. Will you pay the kidnappers? Will you marry me? Will you free Robert the Outlaw King so that he can go to rescue his family? The key thing is that the players don't get to answer the question until the next session. If you get really lucky, the players will spend all their free time between now and the next session, thinking about the question and debating with each other about what the answer should be. Now, a less literal way of doing this is to create a mystery. The PCs walk into a room and discover a corpse, or discover documents that may reveal the location of the lost city of Chandra-La, or activate a magical portal leading to places unknown. Who killed Othnak? How can they translate the documents, and what do they say? What will they find on the other side of the portal? As with the dilemma, the mystery invites the players to think about the answer and anticipate being able to solve the mystery when they play again. Along similar lines, you can describe a vista. Wax a little poetic with a grandiose description. The strange azure plains of the Nephilim realms, the great halls of Moria, a wretched hive of scum and villainy clinging to the horizon. Now, this description is an invitation to the players to explore this wondrous or enticing or terrifying place. And of course, once again, you end the session so that they can only anticipate what they will find and await the opportunity to do so when they play again. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, rather than ending a session with an opportunity, it's perhaps unsurprising to discover that a good ending can also be a big conclusion. An easy example is simply the conclusion of a scenario. Taking a break at the point where a scenario has reached a big, definitive conclusion can help to solidify the sense of accomplishment, that a new milestone in the campaign has been reached. When you look back at a campaign, these milestones will chart out the journey you've all taken together. Placing these milestones definitively at the end of sessions will help them stand out in your group's memory. And from a practical standpoint, this can also be a good place to wrap up for the night so that everyone, including you, can have some time to think about what they want to do next. When you end a session at a scenario's conclusion, though, make sure to give some space for the epilogue or falling action, the stuff that takes place after the big climax. That's an important part of the scenario. And until it happens, the scenario isn't actually done. It can be really easy to fall into the trap of thinking, big climax, so we're all done here. But for a sense of true finality, you want the denouement. You want the players to begin getting a feel for what the new equilibrium will be. Now, there can be exceptions to this, but they tend to skew back towards being a cliffhanger. You shoot the dragon, it falls from the air, you've won! The cliffhanger is the anticipation of the denouement. What will be your reward? What will be the consequences? You'll have to come back to find out. You may be able to find similar moments in the middle of scenarios. Keep a particular eye out for the resolution of stakes that are of particular significance to one of your characters. For example, when a cleric in my campaign realized that the church had betrayed him, I recognized that this was where we needed to end the session. By breaking on these significant character beats, particularly if the characters themselves are thinking deeply about how things turned out, you're giving the players the opportunity to also live long in those moments. Another effective place to break a session is just after a huge revelation. We've already talked about escalating bangs that lead to cliffhangers. You open the door to find your ex-wife who you thought was dead standing there. But what I'm talking about here are big, significant info dumps. For example, in my campaign set in Monty Cook's Tollus, the PCs had spent a dozen or so sessions finding enigmatic clues about a place called the Bane Warrens, and had been trying to figure out what the Bane Warrens were and why it was so significant. Then there came a session where an NPC sat down and told the PCs exactly what the Bane Warrens were, where they had come from, and why they were significant. It was a major payoff, and a lot of new information. I ended the session there, not only because this information changed the equilibrium of the campaign, but because I knew the players needed time to process everything they had just learned. I knew they would spend the time between this session and the next session thinking about this info dump. The campaign would live in their imagination, even though we weren't actively playing. And when we came back to the table, they would be raring to go with all the things they had thought about while we were gone. Now, something to note here is that when I sit down to start a session, I'm generally not aiming for a specific ending. In fact, the real trick with an RPG is finding the ending. Unlike a scriptwriter or novelist, you only have a limited amount of control over where the game session will take you, and how fast it will take you there. That's actually why I use the word finding. The scriptwriter can sculpt any ending they want. As a GM, you need to be aware of when the ending happens, and then actually end the session. This can be tricky because, as we've seen, a lot of effective endings are about cutting at the moment when people are most eager and excited to keep playing, when everyone really wants to know what will happen next, and that will include you. You will be eager, you will be excited, you will want to keep playing. But if you miss a potential ending, there probably won't be another one coming along for a while. And that's when you'll end up just kind of, awkwardly cutting at some arbitrary point because you've run out of time. That's why it's your responsibility to find that moment of excitement and then resist the urge to keep playing. Now, to find the moment for that effective ending, you'll first need to be aware when you're in what I call the ending window. That's the window of time at the end of the session where it's acceptable to say, "That's all, folks." Now, it doesn't matter how perfect an ending a particular moment might be if it comes, 2 hours into a 4-hour session. You don't want to wrap up there. Although, that might be a good place to take a 5 or 10 minute break. Now, for me, in a 4-hour session, the ending window is generally about 15 minutes before our scheduled end time to about 10 minutes after. If I'm running for a group where the end time is hard and fast, then the window starts more like 30 minutes before our end time, and of course ends at our end time. Now, if I'm in the ending window, I know that I'm looking for an ending, and can start framing and pacing the action accordingly. Now, I have a simple trick for staying aware of where I am in the session. A kitchen timer. Before the session starts, I simply set the timer to go off at our scheduled end time, and put it discreetly behind my shield. It's usually surrounded by a pool of dice. I can then tell at a glance where we're at. 3 hours left, 2 hours left, 1 hour left, half an hour left. Start looking for your ending. Why not just use the timer on your phone? Well, the timer on my phone generally needs to be checked. I need to turn on the screen. It also opens up the possibility for other distractions in the forms of notifications and the like. The kitchen timer, by contrast, just sits there in my peripheral vision. Not only can I check it with a flick of my eye, but I'll periodically notice it throughout the session without having to actively think about checking the time. It keeps me tuned in. And over time, you'll find your knowledge of where you are in a session will bring you other benefits besides pacing for effective endings. Some of this is practical, like knowing when you should take a break. Others can be a little more ephemeral. You'll start developing a gut instinct for pacing, when you have time to let things play out, and when you need to get the players moving with harder framing and higher stakes. Now, to bring this back around, here's a key thing to remember. A good ending is an invitation to the next session. Don't overthink it, though. The most important thing that will make your players anticipate the next session is having a good time in this one. So it can be just fine to end at the moment, just after the moment, where everyone is laughing and having a good time. Now, if you've been having a good time here and want to find a good way to end this session, you can hit the subscribe button, and the bell, and I guess any other buttons you find down there. Leave a comment, too. Good gaming. This is Justin Alexander, and I'll see you at the table.